and welcome to History by the Pint, a podcast series that discusses all things history and archaeology in the time it takes to drink a pint. My name is Alex Rosen, I'm a producer and writer, and with me as always is Glynn Davis, a curator at Colchester Castle Museum, and Chris Shevitsky, a lecturer and researcher in Rome. In this episode, Glyn's taking us back to 60 AD and the harrowing story of Boudicca's destruction of Colchester. So Glynn, you work in a building that's got a very special connection to Boudicca's story, don't you?
I do, yeah. I work for Colchester Museums, and the main museum is in Colchester Castle. So that's a Norman castle, but actually sits atop what was the Temple of Claudius, which once upon a time would have been the most impressive building in all of Roman Britain, and was, yes, sacked by Queen Boudicca.
Wow, that must be an amazing place to work. So what did this building look like then, Glynn?
Well, it's an interesting question, Alex, because in some ways we don't know. We have very, very, very little surviving evidence of the temple, but we can imagine what it's like if we look to other places in Europe, even to Rome itself. It was a classical style temple, so with columns, roof, gilding on things.
What's it built of then? Because you say it's similar to other temples. Is it imported stone? Is it local stone?
Yeah, so it's an interesting fact. There's no local stone to Colchester. So any stone coming up is probably coming down from the Medway. I suppose a lot of wood, bit of stone. There's a huge amount of marble that's been found around the town, although this may relate to a later sort of refurbishing of the temple. But within their means, I think this would have been one of the most impressive looking buildings. The only evidence we have for this is something very unique and something really special about Colchester Castle. It hides beneath it the podium on which this temple sat. And what we have surviving are essentially the vaults. You think of these sort of barrel chambers running horizontally with each other. They make up this podium which the temple was sat on.
I just say this is presumably why the Normans then build the castle on top, because it's got this massive podium already there.
Absolutely, this is it. And if you look at Colchester Castle today, you'll see running all the way up here are these courses of red tiles, and undoubtedly they would have reused a lot of the material that was around Colchester, maybe from the temple and elsewhere, to build that castle.
It's quite strange, isn't it? Because I've been with you a couple of times down into these vaults, which they're pretty amazing, despite the danger to scalping yourself and knocking your head on the ceilings. But they're incredibly atmospheric spaces, but in some ways they are misleading because, like you say, they're not actual lived-in spaces. They're just architectural gaps, right?
Yeah, it's hard to describe, but I call them a false space, in that they would have been filled with sand. So you create these vaults and they filled them with sand, and this acts, as a really strong platform. It's strong enough to support that temple. So it's really, really clever. But what you see today, as you descend the 20 steps, and we always say you're going, each foot is 100 years back in time, you're going to a full space because it would have been filled with sand, and it's only been partially excavated. And I call it a full space because you wouldn't have originally have been able to stand in it. But actually, nobody ever mentions this. The last people to have been in that vault were the Iron Age Brits who were forced to construct the temple. And as some of us may know, that is one of the gripes of the Iron Age Britons and Boudicca, who then used that as it's not exactly an excuse, but a rationale to overthrow the Romans, amongst other things. And this, we have that lovely passage from Tacitus, one of the ancient Roman authors who records this, that they're really put out, the Brits around Colchester, the Trinovantes, because they've been forced to create this temple. And I find that really, really interesting. So this Roman construction is using that kind of almost slave labour.
Beyond the temple, what do we know about what Colchester looked like when Boudicca attacks the town?
Well, it's quite a fledgling town, really. It's a colony, and that's really important to say. It's made a colony in about AD 49, and it's just starting to evolve, I suppose, from the sort of legionary camp, so they're adapting some of the buildings. And again, this is seen through the archaeology, that after a point they're adapting and turning the colony into a functioning town, if you like. And it's starting to gain some of the usual buildings that you see in a Roman town. So we have the temple, that's probably exceptional, but the Temple of Claudius, and there's a specific reason for that. That's because Colchester is the capital of Britain at this time, and you need to be worshipping the imperial cult. So we have the temple, well, maybe that's exceptional, but we also have a theatre in the town, and you've got a lot of housing. They've converted some of the legionary structures, probably kept some of the decent ones. So it's turning into a sort of standard Roman town in that way. But it doesn't have any defensive walls. I think that's really important to state. Colchester actually has some of the earliest walls in the country that are still standing, and they're built really early on. But that postdates Boudicca, and that's again one of the issues. One of the issues that led to the downfall of the town.
The second time
Absolutely,
around.
Because the city, it's not very old, is it? By the time of the sack, presumably. I mean.
No, so it's become this colony in AD 49, and Boudicca attacks in 60 AD.
Okay.
So, you're looking, it's not a lot of time at all, really, is it? And again, the people there are veterans. So, again, this is another Roman principle of colonising. They put in people who are going to be loyal to them and can start up the town, I suppose. So you've got a lot of veteran settlers, people who have performed their duty as soldiers, and they're given land and a pension. They're marrying off. They're putting down roots, essentially. And this is very interesting because most recently, we about 10 years ago now, it's actually the anniversary of its discovery. We have something very special, which is the discovery of the Fenwick hoard. And this is a group of jewellery as well as military awards and other precious things that were found buried together in one of the houses in Colchester. And it speaks to the people living there at that time, and indeed what happened to the population of Colchester when Boudicca attacked.
Before we get into the reasons why that hoard might be buried, well, why does Boudicca attack Colchester? Well, what's the backstory to that?
Well, I suppose essentially there's a power struggle. There's a power struggle between Rome and Britain, or at least the Iceni tribe. That's where modern day Norfolk is, around there, East Anglia. That's where the Iceni are, and they're led by King Prasutagus. And essentially he's sort of, if you like, left his kingdom. If he dies, it's his daughters, or his wife and daughters, are to inherit. But they're sort of to inherit that leadership, if you like, sort of in hand with the emperor at the time, which was Nero. Now, Prasutagus does die, and Nero doesn't follow through if he agreed to that in the first place. And he seeks to make a point of this, and it's quite brutal, actually. I mean, Boudicca is flogged, and her daughters are raped. It's horrific what's happened to them. And so that's the main reason, I think, that then Boudicca rises up and she tries to gather all the tribes to her.
When you read Tacitus on this, it doesn't seem that it's an imperial policy that's specifically targeted at punishing the Iceni, but it's the local veterans and the local commanders on the ground abusing their power and their position. And, in some ways, why on earth would an emperor thousands of miles away care what's going on with a small local tribe, maybe? But the impression you get from Tacitus is that these are the veterans and the officials in the moment who are going beyond what they should do, and Tacitus seems quite critical of this in some ways.
And I guess it's that sort of old Roman tactic, isn't it, of intimidation and blunt force, really, to make a statement about, we're here to stay and this is how we're going to act. And it sounds like they just overdid it.
Well, I think it's a great point to make, because you can sometimes think the Romans are these lovely civilizing people that come over, and isn't it much better the Romans are here, and didn't they do a great thing for the Iron Age Britons? But it's not that, of course. As I've said, they're colonizers, and that's brutal. And yes, maybe they are just go too heavy-handed. They push too hard with the wrong people, and that's what kicks this off.
So what happened next then, Glynn? What's the play-by-play when the forces of Boudicca hit Colchester?
So Boudicca's gathered this force, and essentially I say surprises the town. They know she's coming, and this is really interesting because I suppose we'll never know, but we don't get a sense of people fleeing. But we do know from Tacitus that they kind of hole up at the Temple of Claudius. And Duncan Mackay is an archaeologist and author who's recently written on this, and I think he makes a really good case that it's not the temple per se, but maybe the precinct, this huge area around the temple that's barricaded. And you've got to remember these are all vets, these are all veterans. So I don't think they're going to run away. And they're also waiting on, I think it's the 9th, isn't it? They're waiting on the 9th Legion as reinforcement who never come. So we know from Tacitus that they make a stand there, but ultimately after 2 days, which is a long time, they're defeated and everyone is slaughtered. So we assume no one really escapes the town of Colchester, that they're completely butchered. And as I've said, there is then this systematic destruction of the town, levelling everything. Even, and this is really important as they move on, because then Boudicca then goes on to London, Londinium, then St Albans, Verulamium, but coming out of that city and even going in, she would have encountered the necropoli, the graveyards, essentially the cemeteries of the Roman dead. And we know from 2 tombstones, we only have 2 extant tombstones in the collection, that these were sort of toppled, if you like, or they're believed to have been toppled by Boudicca. And this makes perfect sense. If they've spent all that time systematically destroying and firing the city, they're going to desecrate the resting places of the Roman peoples as well. I mean, 2 of these tombstones, you have an image of Marcus Favonius Facilis, he's a centurion, and you have a Thracian, a cavalry person. So just even seeing that image, is going to make you want to crush it and topple it. And I say this for 2 reasons. In her destruction, there's a great irony for Colchester, and indeed the other 2 towns that she destroys. And that is that her damage to the towns is so ferocious, and there is so much burning, that the irony is that it's actually preserved a huge amount of material. So this intense heat you get has literally left its mark in the ground. We call it the Boudiccan destruction horizon. And it is a compact, burnt layer. If you think of stratigraphy, so layers in the ground, you will find it throughout Colchester. It's there. And it's like a time capsule. That is, everything before that is pre-60 AD. That is 60 AD. And everything after it is post. So through her destruction, she's left us an incredible archaeological record, from bits of burnt daub and bits of building, which is amazing because it's so, lots of organics are used, wood and that would just perish, down to the personal effects of people. And indeed, I've mentioned it, but the Pfennig hoard is hurriedly hidden. And again, this intense burning and destruction preserved it.
What exactly is in this hoard then? You mentioned some of the military paraphernalia.
Yeah, I sort of go through it. It's a really interesting collection. So to describe it, first it is found as this bundle of metal. So clearly through the archaeological process, and this is why, under professional archaeological standards, you can find so much more information. It revealed there would have been a textile around it, so maybe a leather bag. So we know this was heaped into a bag. We know it was in a room that maybe was a kitchen in this Roman house, and that something maybe would have been placed over the top of it. So someone's made a hole in the floor of their kitchen, put this bag of precious jewellery in, put something over the top so it's not discovered. And indeed, it wasn't discovered in 60 AD. It was discovered in 2014, so it's quite phenomenal. And inside, we have the remains of what would have been a little jewellery box, or a box of sorts, a little pyxis, and this would have been clad in silver. It had little feet on it, which at the time were believed to be ivory, but new analysis of that reveals they're bone, but they're lovely little turned feet. So it's a lovely little precious box. And inside we have the most amazing gold jewellery. We have 3 bracelets, 2 of which are like a wire that creates a figure of 8 and would have wrapped around, so sort of these big hoops that would have been worn on the upper arm. We have 2 pairs of gold earrings, these big balls of gold, as well as little pearls. 5 gold rings, several of which have emeralds set in them. And we have some other really interesting things. So we have these military awards, which are known as armili, 2 of which would have been more maybe around sort of the wrist area, and 1, quite a large thing, which has a hunt scene running around it, and then a big medallion with the gods Jupiter, Fortuna, I believe, and Victory. I think I've got that right. And that could have been, again, worn or worn off the breastplate. We also have a little bulla. Now, this is a really lovely object. This is a little sort of round sack-shaped object made of metal, given to sort of young boys who were freeborn citizens, I think on like the 8th day after their birth. And this has sort of signified their membership almost to society, and I think they gave it up when they became a teenager around 16. And lastly, there's always one more thing, which is this intaglio. So an intaglio is a little engraved gem, which would have originally been set in a ring, and they're used as seals, personal seals to stick into wax on letters and other sorts of things. But it wasn't set in anything, and that has a pantheress on it, a female panther. And that is really interesting because that predates the rest of the hoard by about 50 years. So that's what we call a curated piece. So that's an old heirloom, if you like, that's been put in here. And just to say, this gold jewellery is the spitting image of stuff that is being worn in Pompeii, and indeed that has been discovered from Pompeii. And as we know, Vesuvius erupted in AD 79, so, it's only sort of 20 years apart. So whoever's wearing this is very fashionable. This is the fashion of the time, and this jewellery most likely would have been made probably in Italy. What we have here are two people represented. We have very male objects, if you like, and in this sense, they are gendered, so to speak, because not only sort of women wore earrings, so that's definitely female jewellery, if you like. And then the military awards are definitely sort of, if you like, male, because they are only issued to men in the army. So we have two people here, and we think like the little bulla may have been the keepsake of the man himself. And I should also say there's some coinage as well, which isn't insignificant. 28 coins, but quite a decent amount of cash. So we've got these two individuals. We've got this thing, you can imagine it being hurriedly buried in the floor of the house. And we assume these two people didn't escape. They would have made their stand at the Temple of Claudius. Maybe women and children hid inside the temple itself as the men, the veterans, tried to protect them. So that's their story. That's this amazing story of the Pfennig hoard, or certainly a way I like to unpick it, and others have as well.
And it's quite nice that you've got, often you think of hoards and you think, oh, they're valuable objects and things, but there's the very personal objects in here, like the little bulla from when the person turns 16 or whatever you said. That's copper or bronze, I think, isn't it? And so it's not that that's got perhaps material value, but clearly a very, very personal value, and that's being hidden along with jewellery and gold coins as well.
I mean, it sort of takes you back, to the fact that this is a province that has only really just been conquered, right? And unbelievably, they have no major walls. There must have been sort of ditches or some type of temporary defences, but you're living in an unsettled area and you're the first people in there. There's all those familiarities or similarities, I should say, with Wild West and frontier zones and things, and yet people are trying to show off their status, making a new life, a new place. But you always run that risk that you are, not in Italy. You are surrounded by potentially people that can rise up. And yeah, I guess those objects just take you back to the fear that was coming their way and the need to sort of bury stuff and get your family to safety. It's an incredible portrait.
And it's the last time that Colchester was at the cutting edge of Italian fashion.
Yeah, except for Glynn's Armani suits that he wears on Sundays. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. We all know curators like to look sharp.
Yeah. So that's an incredible find, and I mean, I do find it extraordinary about Boudicca that we know so little about her from the text, but yet in archaeological terms she looms pretty large, right? Because there's plenty of other chaotic sackings and battles and things in the ancient world that there's just no evidence for, and yet here we have pristine evidence of this, well, the most dramatic moment in Roman Britain. It's extraordinary, really.
It's amazing. What I like about the Colchester and its archaeology, it really speaks to this period. We have the Brits, and Boudicca are so quick, really, in their sacking of the town and its destruction. They sort of leave nothing behind. They are ghosts. And indeed, Boudicca is a ghost. We don't know where Boudicca died and how she died. There's conflicting evidence. There's only a few sources, and one is going off of Tacitus anyway, probably, So it's interesting. People love to explore Boudicca as a figure, and I can see why. And you see sort of every now and again there are new readings of her. But really, it's only the archaeology that's going to present something new. And I think discoveries like the Pfennig hoard really bring that into view, and you can start to paint a picture. And maybe it's less about Boudicca per se, but these huge events, this destruction, this battling against the Romans. And again, you can think of these Romans, these two individuals, and, try and build up a picture and maybe build some sympathy and empathy. But at the same time, not long ago, they were the ones colonising and wreaking havoc and also meting out the destruction and death to people. So, a hugely turbulent time. And as you say, it is a frontier place. It is like the Wild West. There are no walls. There's only sort of ditches around the town. And people, maybe they're complacent. They think they've won, but they haven't.
So after the Boudiccan rebellion's been dealt with, what happens to Colchester? Does it bounce back?
Absolutely, yeah. It's sort of boom years, I suppose. They rebuild the town, and it's incredibly populous, and turns into a fully functioning Roman town for many years, up into the 5th century. Much like London, I suppose the difference is Colchester after that loses its capital status. At least we believe it does. and that goes to London. But despite that, Colchester would have remained a really, really important town in Britain with that temple. And we see it through the archaeology as well. So yeah, it really bounces back. And so in that time, maybe Boudicca and that destruction just becomes a memory.
And I guess that's sort of part of the message of the Romans, you might knock them, might put them down a few times, but they keep on bouncing back, and that they rebuild, and that they're very difficult to get rid of, basically, once they're there.
Just keep building. And that's and they build walls. They learn their lesson, and they build really big walls.
Right. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, good stuff. Really, really interesting, Glynn. Thanks so much for that. And all right, we'll see you guys next time. Cheers then.
Catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Cheers.